orgs which are rooted in ideology, connecting to a deeper essence, they keep reinventing how the essence travels. I mean, our whole culture is regenerative. I think as a culture only, the essence continues and it keeps taking newer and newer forms. CJP Gen Z protests are a regeneration of the Gandhian non-violence ideals of truth and non-violence. And sure, there is not a direct lineage there, but there's a regeneration of those values, right?
So I definitely feel women in leadership roles are starting to recognize these things much more and able to bring that wisdom back into the organization in a way that it serves the primary purpose.
Because our organization was leaderful and others could represent the org and I wasn't required everywhere, for me that allowed me to explore other spaces. And when I explored other spaces, I realized that social problems can't be solved by one organization. We need an ecosystem. And then I started weaving the ecosystem.
I feel there are at times not really the right time where everything is figured and sorted and then you kind of make the transition. As much as it's a in sync thing that this is in the highest potential of the leader and the cause that we're really wanting to serve.
And this is what I mean by the N+1 org. Everybody is pulling everybody else to their next level, to their highest potential.
Bad past experience, and at the same time we're always trying to move forward. So as the past starts accumulating, it's harder to move forward, and hence it also shrinks us to say, I have to just preserve my own thing and do it my way.
Swami Vivekananda has said that your ancestors were great, but you must be greater. And he said, if you need permission from anybody, I give you the permission to be greater than your ancestors. Namaste and welcome to yet another conversation in the series of these very important conversations we're having at Wisdom Tree. And today's conversation is called N+1. It's about leadership, succession planning, about building an organization where people actually keep moving up in their competency, in their power, in their impact. And it's a must listen for any organization that's grappling with questions of how do you really build leadership that makes an organization a lasting, sustainable organization. And who better to start this conversation with than my own N+1, Kejal. So, Kejal, welcome and happy to be in a conversation with you.
Yeah, very happy to be in this conversation. For a change, we're going to be like flipping the model itself to doing a conversation rather than like an interview. So it's exciting to talk about a topic which we've experienced and lived and are seeing how can we bring our experiences together on it.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking when we were starting that the medium itself is the message. And when you interview someone, then there's an expert and there's an assumption that somebody knows more about it. And almost like a podcast about N+1 should actually be a conversation, not an interview, because we represent two sides of the same topic. And it's so easy to go into an interview one way or the other, right? I can start interviewing
Hmm.
you, or you can. A conversation is so much harder because it requires us to keep jamming with each other. So I think we've taken on this challenge because that itself is a expression of us having really lived this through. So yeah, I'm curious about how this goes because we really don't know how this will be. Uh, yeah. So anything you want to start with, Kejal, or should I hop right in?
Yeah, we can hop right in and see what comes up.
Well, I want to start with this whole N+1 thought process, which I know you at some stage found very cute and sweet. When I started saying that we should not say N-1, we should say N+1. We should not say second line leadership, but next line leadership. Um, and I was curious how you found it or what you found about it as cute. So I don't know. Do you want to share that, and then I can talk about why I was excited about it?
Yeah, I think for long, like in our sector, we keep talking about second line leadership as a very common jargon and language. I think there's something about this idea of being second and like, the whole almost mechanical approach of also like naming it like level one, level two, level three, and level one. So something of that sort, like so the whole dynamic there is very, very, I feel one transactional, but second also some form of demeaning, feeling like because we come from an education system where first is always the better. So there's a conditioning also of that, saying that okay, whoever does the first role is always the best role. If you're doing the second role, then that second role is not as important or as good or as great. So something about that for me definitely as second line is irritating, feels like a second order kind of approach of engagement. And when you also mentioned about the whole N+1 and instead of N-1, I felt the essence itself of how you're engaging with it you want to not get trapped in the language, because the language also kind of takes forward a certain message. So I think once you will explain it more, I think we'll kind of unpack it further. But I think that language denotes so much more beyond just word, and it helps us break out of existing mental models. It's a very important part of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think N minus one gives deficit feelings that I am N, she's N minus one, or she's second in line, like you said, and the language creates a mental model also. And I think the whole intent, as silly as it may sound, but to start saying that, hey, she's an N plus one, she's my next generation, she's next in line, not second in line. And that is a futuristic framing that acknowledges the fact that there is a future where somebody else is going to take up things, and that's what you need to gear up for. This also, this realization came to me when, normally we say, oh, Abhishek's 44, Kejal's 31, 32, I think. So you say Abhishek's older. But when you flip it and you say, hey, Kejal has more years left, she has 12 more years to go. And so the total deposit of years is more with your N plus one. They have more time to kind of work this through. And so to build and invest more in that, right? So how do we flip this whole thinking of older is wiser and to say, hey, younger has more time to go also, and both have roles. I just want to also double click this one more level at this whole hero myth that we keep talking about in Wisdom Tree and
Mm.
in the BRM ecosystem, that the assumption that the founder is the hero or the leader is the, Shiro, hero ki jaga. That assumption itself really needs questioning, right? And while we know that it is all interconnected and that everybody chips in to really make something happen, everybody sacrifices to make something happen. But really, like this whole assumption of celebrating the hero only or primarily, and how deeply it's ingrained in us that it invisibilizes so much. I think this whole N minus one, second in line, is all a part of that whole hero myth, saying that hey, the founder is the primary karta dharta, and everybody else is
Mm.
just by the way. And we need to change that only very deeply. So while we say N plus one, I think overall as an org itself, to shift from saying that hey, this is a one person endeavor and we've all gathered behind this person, and then wonder why is there hierarchy, why are we a pyramid org, to actually saying we're a network org and all of us did this together. Somebody stepped in first, yes, but everybody is kind of a part of the kind of collective.
Yeah, and I think I want to add two parts there. One is it is as essential to acknowledge the initiator, the first person, the guy who kind of, takes the person who takes the bait in forward and say, okay, let's kind of start this thing. So it's as important. It's nothing to take away from the founder role or the primary person role. At the same time, the people who join later cannot be just another person who joined and kind of made this. And I feel like, in my generation of folks, there was a whole choice of saying that, do I want to be a founder and start something new? Because, it's cool, sexy, somebody kind of, you get extra weightage, you will get selected for better things, etc. At the same time, for many of us who made a choice to say, okay, let's not start something new because there is something already existing which has done a lot of groundwork to reach where it is. And what does it mean to join there and support and build it together? And then starting many small things and being more fragments, can we come together and coexist and build things together? So the if we do not move out of this whole one person is the glorious person who kind of is making everything possible model to a many people come together to make something possible, then finding the next line is always going to be a challenging, because then it's like the next line is only supposed to come and like fit in existing shoes and make sure the existing set agenda is taken forward. And then it is very hard because so much needs to change when somebody has to kind of, or many people have to come together and take things forward. And I don't think it is easy to bring people forward to play the next in line till we value the role of the next in line, and that it is as much a legitimate and a beautiful choice as much as starting something is. And the benefits or the rewards of being the next in line are also as much beautiful, amazing, rewarding. You don't have to always be the initiator of something to get rewarded by the society.
Do you want to share about your choice then at that stage where you said, okay, should I start my own or should I join? What drove that choice apart from what you just shared? What was your thought process? Did it work out for you? Why did it work out for you in terms of your own, when you look at the 19-year-old Kejal's choice, I guess, or you've chosen this again and again, and every stage you could have said, okay, I've learned, now I want to start. So curious about your choice.
Yeah, I think, of course, as a 19-year-old, I didn't know as much about starting an organization. I didn't even know about social sector. So in that sense, for me, a lot of my learning comes from being part of VRM as a volunteer, learning from this space and contributing and taking it forward to many people. I feel like the other aspect for me, which played a role many times when I've rethought, maybe I should go back and pursue my psychology and then continue and reset up a clinic. So I think one is the pull of the sector to stay on, seeing that, the sector is playing an important role, which so many other choices of career will not fulfill. And I think second part, if I have to be in this sector and build something, then if I start something new, it is again going to take the same long curve to figure things out, which BRM had already taken, which you had already taken. And that made sure that the institution was already learning from so many experiences and building. So I think one part is joining something which is already formed. Second, of course, finding alignment. I think there was so much alignment in terms of how BRM worked and how you looked at some of these things. So there was a lot of resonance. And if there is resonance of spirit and alignment, I think leaving something and starting something new just because, oh, I want to start and I will be kind of, making it my way, I think doesn't seem to be of service to the purpose. Third, I would definitely also acknowledge your role in this whole journey. Because if you weren't somebody who wanted to build it with other people, then yeah, a lot of us would not have stayed on and said, okay, this person already knows what they want to build and how they want to build. Doesn't seem like we have any role to contribute further. So then we would have also gone ahead and started speaking something of our own.
Absolutely. I think for me also it's been unlearning experience because in school I was the prefect and the head boy, and everything tells you that you are the special one. You're wearing a sash. You're going around. You have privileges. So this whole message that gets internalized, and then I started BRM at 18. So I'm like, okay, at 18 I'm a founder. So everything in the system, celebrates the founder a lot, right? And even today, everybody wants to talk to the founder, invite the founder, and there's this founder hypnosis. And I really feel that it's a gaze problem, that our gaze itself is distorted. And once in a while I ask like a thought experiment, right? Who in Ramayan had it the toughest? And you can say, of course, Sri Ram had it toughest. He had to fight the battle. Then you could say, no, no, but Sita had the toughest because she had to go and she was taken by Ravan. You could say, no, no, Lakshman was had the toughest because without him the war wouldn't have been won. He's not even celebrated, and he had to like really be there away from his family. And then we say Urmila because I remember seeing a play on Lakshman's wife, who's like, "Hey, you just left, and I'm left here for these 12 or 14 years all alone, and you've gone and you're doing your thing." And that sacrifice, and I wonder what if she'd have said, "No, no going," and would that have led to a different result for the war itself? But we
Mm.
never trace this line all the way back to saying that somebody out there is making a choice, is sacrificing, right? And is choosing to, not be the leader. I think that really is the question.
Yeah, it is very hard to mental model the so many invisible parts of, making something possible. And the most visible parts become the parts which get seen, celebrated, and acknowledged. And I think that's probably also what happens when people bet on founders and don't want to bet on systems or organizations.
No, I've had a lot of founders talk to me and to Wisdom Tree saying, death and destruction are a part of nature's cycles, and it's okay if the work is meant to die, it will die, and mere baad nahi rahega to nahi rahega. It's like, it's totally fine. And, the whole idea there is that, yeah, why should an organization live forever? Why should we even have succession planning? I've
Mm.
had founders who said, till I am here, this is here. When I'm gone, the work is gone, and I don't mind, right? And it's interesting, how does one respond to that perspective when the question of succession planning kind of comes in? I don't know if you have a take on, is it not okay for orgs to die, or like why bother doing succession planning at all? Like, ठीक है, जब तक है चलने दो.
Yeah, I mean, while yes, and why not? You know, Organizations can come and go, and organizations can die. It doesn't need to be so associated because an organization in the social sector starts because somebody is passionate, they want to kind of make a change, and then we realized programs cannot sustain, so we build institutions. So, at one part of me agrees to it in that yes, why not? And part of nature, death is part of the cycle. At the same time, another part of me, which probably is a little more, wanting to have impact and wanting to kind of build something. I feel there's so many assets that an organization builds over the period of time. Somebody spent like decades building relationships, building a social capital, legal capitals, relational capital, trust, understanding on that domain, and reached a certain peak. And if it could get transitioned, and if some more people can come and take it forward, the longevity of that work would kind of increase from, say, 30 years to, say, 60 years, and even further if it becomes a robust institution. At the same time, if the core essence is getting diluted, then maybe not. So I think it's a very tricky question to say, okay, yes, this is the right answer, but I feel there is something more that can be attempted there. I don't know what you feel.
I clearly feel that most of the times it's a defense mechanism. It's a way of justifying the inability to build a next line of leadership and blaming it on nature and giving elegant explanations. To me, it's a little bit like saying, hey, why not chop this tree? Because when you chop this tree, anyways, fungus will grow, herbs, shrubs will grow, it'll clear space for other trees. Yes and no, because you don't need to chop a tree to allow it a natural, natural weaning away. If
Hmm.
an organization's time is gone, the idea will lose traction if it has failed to evolve. And I think organizations become dated precisely because they didn't evolve. And they didn't evolve precisely because there was no transmission of those ideas to a next in line person. Right. And that's how the thought also evolves. So for me, essence is also not static. The essence or the expression of essence evolves. And every generation takes the same essence and expresses it in newer ways, right? And orgs which are rooted in ideology, connecting to a deeper essence, they keep reinventing how the essence travels. And if you did not find somebody or a group of people who could re-articulate that essence in today's time, then essentially what you did is disconnect and literally let something good die.
Hmm.
So I have a very strong view about the fact that this is an excuse. Most of the times, I don't think there are very spiritual founders. If you look at our most spiritual people, right? If you look at Swami Vivekananda saying, "Ha, Ramakrishna Mission, what's the point? Let it kind of okay." No, today we have Ramakrishna Mission all over the country. And or if Gandhi ji or Nehru ji would say, "Ah, theek hai, Indian National Congress freedom ke baad," though actually people like Vinoba were also there radically on Gandhi ji saying, let's shut this org and convert it to a seva org. Yes, still coming from a very different place of consciousness, not coming from saying, oh, I failed to build a leadership. Gandhi ji built an amazing next line which carried through post freedom also, I think. So to me, yeah, I have a very clear view that there are a lot of unconscious dynamics at play when it comes to the matter of succession planning. And one of them is justifying our inability to actually build a next in line using nature as a way. But yeah, there are also visionary leaders who are grounded, anchored, rooted, and who say, yeah, and there are panths which have, aise panth bhi hain. There are traditions or organizations which have, maturely said. I have a friend who set up an org with a deadline saying we'll be an org till 7 years and we'll close at 7 years. But that was very different. That was already announcing and saying we are going to be a 7 year org. We don't want to be there forever. Right. So it's where is this coming from? Right. I think that's kind of the difference. Did you take a samadhi
Hmm.
or did you die of starvation? Both are death, but starvation ko samadhi bolna bhi fair nahi hai. I mean, so is there a choice? I think so. That's how I look at it.
I have a follow-up question for you, Abhishek, because what you're talking about is also in some form of regeneration, and regeneration is also part of nature. Do you want to elaborate and double click a little more on what does regeneration mean, and maybe if there are some lived examples that you may have?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? Regeneration exists in nature. And like I said, using nature to dismiss some other facts is a weaponizing of the idea of nature, biomimicry, and so on, right? And regeneration or renewal could mean destruction ke baad wala regeneration, or it could mean evolution, where you're evolving in newer and newer forms. And without making it too philosophical, I think for me, I mean, our whole culture is regenerative. I think as a culture only, the essence continues and it keeps taking newer and newer forms, right? The essence stays, but forms keep kind of coming new. So for me, for example, CJP Gen Z protests are a regeneration of the Gandhian non-violence ideals of truth and non-violence. And sure, there is not a direct lineage there, but there's a regeneration of those values, right? So there is a regenerative element in nature. There's a regenerative element in great kind of ideas. And at the same time, without a transmission, without people kind of continuing generation after generation to talk about it, it will not transmit. So regeneration still needs a shared soil. It still needs the passing of seeds. So I think to me, that would be really like you're responsible for regeneration of the essence that has chosen you to express itself. right? And that's a part of the responsibility. But curious if you had any specific examples in mind.
I had two examples. One of the most recent, I'll start from there. In Community Connect Fellowship, one of our oldest long-standing program, say somewhere close to 2021, with this whole change in generation, how Gen Z started coming in, the expectations of Gen Z being different. I felt we were really deeply contemplating on what's not working. Like something was still not clicking, even if all kind of steps were done right. And in that year, I remember at some point, I said, let's stop the program. Why does this need to continue? If something is not going forward, it's not adding to the values we started with, then why should we continue? And some of the younger folks rather came in and said, no, no, this has served us so much and we want this to go further to more young people. And then we really had a very intense conversation where the two of the youngest people who were what, 20-ish something, they said, no, we want this to continue. And I said, hey, will you take responsibility of this till the end of it to make it work? If you say yes to that, then we are happy to do the whole rehaul that it requires to do. And they said, yes, we want it to continue. And we will stay through the whole course of 6 months to make sure the program not just runs, but we redesign with you. And I feel that pulse of, reorganizing with them, deeply listening to them, helped us adapt CCF so much that in the next last 2 years, CCF has gone to now 3x the number of people we were able to go to earlier, and without any increase in funding or staffing. I think that I felt was one example of regeneration of understanding where the external pulse is, what really needs to be kind of connected and spring from there.
I want to take a part of that credit. I want to give you a part of that credit because I feel if you would have experienced a top-down leadership that kind of controlled you and didn't give you space, then it'll be much harder for you also to give space because it flows, right? Culture flows, so to speak, from founder to next in line to the next in line. And I think we were a culture and we are a culture where people can take leadership irrespective of where they are, and that is encouraged, in fact, right? And a lot of organizations, that's seen as a threat. You're threatened by the fact that somebody new is coming up with something, and a lot of organizations wonder, hey, why is our culture not picking energy? And we're like, because the soil is not fertile. You're not allowing things to sprout. This one large kind of tree in the center is not allowing things to grow around the shrubs and the mycelial network, because it's sucking everything. That you have to build a soil where some of this is regeneration is possible, right? You can't suck everything out and then wonder why is there no regeneration. So yeah, and I think we've been able to create a little bit of that.
Yeah.
You were giving a second example.
The second example is much older, and there I think you have to take the credit. I think our own financial stance, right? Like about say 2017, when the whole movement frame kind of came in BRM, and we said we don't want to just be a program for young people. We want to be an alumni-led youth movement where young people volunteer for long and really take on a lot of the values of Gandhi, Vinoba, and Mohanbai, and bring them together in how we constitute ourselves. I think one of the core principle and philosophy you held was that of Vinoba. Like each person, like 1,000 people putting 1 rupee is more important than one person paying the same money. And while we were trying quite hard to build a whole soil of getting more and more people to do individual contribution, we did build Friends of BRM. We did find so many Sarvanumati based approach to bring your donor community together. We did so many of those experiments. So some parts of it did work till a certain idea where we wanted to build the movement. But the moment it came to grow the financial capital beyond that, we were not able to fully transition. And I remember we had this conversation where we were going back and forth on, no, we have to double down on still finding individual people. And I'm like, we've not been able to find now. It's been more than 2 or 3 years. And then we went back and forth to see, what's our financial stance and how does our financial philosophy link to our primary purpose. And I think, and where we are located, which is a city like Mumbai. And I think then we kind of reconfigured to say, okay, let the movement be built with individual contribution so that it doesn't stop and have volunteer energy, but the programs can be supported by foundations and program can have donor money of foundations and philanthropies who may want to further that kind of work so that even if the money stops, then those programs can stop, but not the movement. I think that point was a negotiation on a very deep fundamental idea of financing itself. And there, I think you took the step back because some of us remember, like, came to you saying, Abhishek, the movement is going to close if you continue like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think uh, one of the things leaders don't do enough is think together with their people. They either think privately, or they think with their peers, or they think with their boards. But they rarely think with their teams. They come to their teams and tell them as it is, right? And I feel more and more, especially in large and legacy organizations, the culture of leader kind of assimilating things within themselves and then articulating. It does not teach people to think or question, right? Because you've not kind of thought through, so you don't know how to think about things. And once you learn to think, then you have the capacity to question the leader, then you build the capacity to lead, right? Uh, and if I had to take it one level deeper, leaders also don't make their processes transparent, their values transparent, right? And again, this is a generational thing, perhaps. And legacy organizations, you see that leaders are these larger than life figures who are supposed to know everything, and everybody is dependent on them. And there's all these projections of greatness on those leaders, and they're supposed to know, right? This whole all-knowing leader itself is such a fantasy, such a fallacy, because leaders don't know. They're like anybody else. They're also figuring and making sense, right? So I think how much a leader makes their own processes transparent, their thought process transparent, how much do they think together? And I would again take it even one more level deeper. How much of their life do they make transparent to their people, right? I think just to see a leader live, see their family, see their life choices, and then kind of make the whole mental map of why is this person this way? What are those choices? How do they look like in real life? I think that allows the next in line to piece together how it all comes together, right? And then the leader stops being this mysterious figure you can't figure out, or who's like this beautiful, larger than life figure, but actually becomes a human being that you can learn, emulate from, right? And that being together has a element of transmission that can't be explained in words or thought. There's an energetic transmission that you're allowing when you're opening yourself up psychologically, mentally, physically. And I think that really allows people to step in. And going back to the regeneration also being possible because 2017 was already 4 or 5 years of you in the system, or 2 3 years in the system, but learning to think, having the space to speak up, being empowered to question, and me also not looking at that as saying, oh, I'm, being kind of my views are being thrown away, but really saying, yes, we have to do this together. And there's also one strange thing here, or semi strange, right? That Vinoba or Gandhi also, the spirit is so strong that this whole next in line legacy work has happened through encounters with elders, has happened through books, has happened through dialogues with. So we've not met Gandhiji and Vinoba, but we met people who walked with him. We met Arun Dada, we met Mohan Bhai, met Jayesh Bhai, met a whole bunch of people who carry that legacy and have passed that spirit to us, right? And in a strange way, for regeneration to happen, I also should not insist that we copy those values and live them. I also have to allow those values to evolve and say the essence will preserve, right? And we'll keep evolving that. So I think some of this is also about giving the space for the spirit to stay, but its form to evolve. And every new generation is more in pulse with the times. Like you said, these two people knew what will work, and we can call out and shout out for Vedika and Swatika. They knew what would work, and we kind of rallied behind them. So I think that for me is a responsible way of leading.
Yeah, I was also thinking how this ethos also that we carry from the Gandhi Vinoba lineage is somewhere the ethos of the movements and the CBOs, where now when we are build, building or looking at scaled sector-wide organizations, it's hard to bring these values because we're also structured more like corporates and structured more like systems that want to deliver. So I don't know if you have a take on how can these two models of organizing itself coexist because the sector is also evolving with so many of these external times.
I have two parts to this answer. One is that irrespective of the model, the unconscious dynamics of succession planning are across, because human beings are human beings, leaders are leaders. And I want to talk a bit about those unconscious dynamics, because in Wisdom Tree, we've learned that the biggest barrier to succession planning is not systems or capacities. It is unconscious dynamics of the leader and the team that prevents that from happening. Right. So that's kind of one part I want to speak. And then the second part I want to speak is, like you said, movements and organizations, and how can really those two worlds learn, because both of them, there are movements also where there is no next in line and the leader goes, the movement goes, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the challenge is across. It's of course organizations may have more structured ways of identifying high potentials, building their competencies, giving them career pathways, and so on. Corporates even more than orgs. So yes, there is truth to that, I think I want to talk a bit about what are those unconscious dynamics, and I'm going to talk from my own experience, right? My own inner work around that. Um, and then I would invite you to also share what is that mirroring back, right? Saying, do those dynamics show up for you? Did you pick any of those? And what were dynamics at your end? I think that's when we'll know what is below the surface or what's said or what's accepted, right? So, is that okay? Can we hop into that? Yeah, I think so. I think a leader has typically one is the whole message that you are special, you're great. Almost the message is internalized that I'm great, I'm great. मेरे जैसा कोई नहीं है. And to kind of let go of that idea or to hold the paradox कि हाँ मेरे जैसा कोई नहीं है but उसके जैसा भी कोई नहीं है, and to kind of have the spirit of generosity to say that hey, I don't want to be the only special one. There is space for everybody to be special one, and we are all in this constellation, the circle of life, right? And to let go of that, to let go of saying okay, not every idea will come from me, not everything will come from me. It's okay, it's okay. And to not feel insecure. And I think a lot of leaders, we don't realize or they don't say it, it's impolite, but there is an insecurity even in the biggest leaders about coming about their next in line kind of becoming better, greater, being more recognized than them. And I think to kind of deeply find security saying I am who I am, right? And they are who they are, and they have their journey, they have their destiny. So I think one is this whole not feeling special or feeling special but letting others also feel special, right? And if you decouple, if you see leaders typically do three or more functions together. When they start something, only one function can't start, right? So you need to do two three things. Even if you're a co-founders, you're typically doing two three things and you get really good at two three things, and then you look for finding someone who's good at two three things. You don't find them because it's hard to find such people, and then it further affirms कि मेरे जैसा कोई नहीं है, unconsciously, right? And that kind of makes you hold on to that idea so strongly, and that idea comes in the middle of truly finding someone. Your next in line need not be a carbon copy of you. In fact, they may look very different from you, right? And you have to back them up. So I think for me, this whole feeling special is one, and I'm sure you feel special as the CEO of BRM. Everybody's saying, oh, it's Kejal, right? Because what happened with me is now happening with you. So I'm curious if that being special piece shows up for you also, feeling special, being special.
Yeah, I think I definitely feel this whole part of, I know this better and I have done this for so long. So I know I get this. I don't think anybody else can get this. I think that part is always playing out. And you feel like, oh, you're playing this role of protector of this essence and core and whatnot kind of stories. There is definitely that element that's there. And I think the organization also typically get designed around that element. So you feel like preserving that is preserving the original purpose or DNA of the organization. At the same time, I feel this whole piece of where I am not able to bring in what my specialness needs to bring in is, I think, the entry point of being able to bring in others, which again I feel like in our equation also, I think places where you knew are not your natural tendencies or competencies is where kind of, I started stepping in. So then that also becomes more like a support rather than, taking away from existing work. And similarly, I feel like even with my next set of people, I think I know there are things I'm not good at. While I may be great at some, but not so great at others. I think those have been entry points to showcase others need to step in and start taking these things up. Because if I do this for any longer, it's going to be more messy than good for the system. So that definitely is important part of, I feel, self-awareness to know what you're good at and what kind of maybe serving. At the same time, what you're not good at and is starting to create harm.
Absolutely. I think the feeling कि ये सब निकम्मे हैं, इन्होंने वो मेहनत नहीं की है, they've not foregone their salaries, and they're like useless at the heart of it, like I'm working so hard, they're not working so hard. And that feeling, and that this metaphor of leaders juggling many balls comes up, right? And when they do succession planning, they try to throw all balls at one person, and they wonder, oh, why is this not working out? Because you're throwing too many balls. But also leaders treating every ball as a glass ball. I think that metaphor came up, right? Like it's okay, a few balls can drop and they'll bounce back, they're rubber balls, right? But if you try to hold every ball as like a glass ball, and then you're like, oh, should I pass on and not, it'll never pass on. Yes, you should not pass on the glass balls first, you should pass on the rubber balls, you should let them fall and bounce back, right? That's how the whole play of creating the next kind of juggling person happens. And I think leaders need to really, then all of us, I'm saying leaders, I'm not excluding us, need to kind of be a little okay with the imperfections and the and थोड़ा ढील देनी पड़ती है. You can't keep pulling your kite. You have to give थोड़ा ढील देना पड़ता है as well. The second one I want to bring out is envy. You know, Kejal, and maybe you've not felt it yet, but there is an intergenerational envy, right? You're like,
Hmm.
Kejal at 32 is nowhere close to me at 32. At 32, I was struggling to get BRM going, find donors. It was so tough, and even one thing was not taking off the ground, and facing so much difficulty in getting started. Look at Kejal at 32. She's the CEO of a thriving ecosystem. She has a lot of resources, a lot of people, a vision, and she's got all her 30s left to kind of drive this. So there is that intergenerational feeling of saying, hey, they have it better, you know, and ye sab mehnat karke, you, it can translate into joy when I look at you as my true kind of person taking this forward, and you feel like your win is my win, which I really
Hmm.
do. But to move from the whole kind of competition to say that your win is my win, you know, and that we are actually one. I think that whole journey itself, I think is again something that I've had to kind of sit with. And to really accept that you have your own trajectory, your own destination, and that trajectory is going to be better in many ways, is going to be richer in many ways. Of course, each trajectory is valuable. The struggle brings its own reward. But I think leaders or we collectively don't talk much about envy, and both ways, right? I'm sure the next in line envies the leader for their place, their capacities, and so on. So curious if envy is something that you want to talk a little bit about, which doesn't get spoken about as a dynamic.
Yeah, I think definitely there is different types of envy. Envy, I think, while you may have envy based on, what I may have at my age and stage, but there is also for me reverse envy of saying that, like, why does this guy have it so easy on these fronts? Like, I don't think I can do these things as fast, as smooth, as good as this person. And why is this person so good at this? So being so good that, the other person cannot do it is also another type of envy. So I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do any of this. It's a different type of envy that I experience vis-a-vis you.
Absolutely. I think not talking about these envies, not coming to terms with it. And then at that envy, you're like, forget it. I'd rather go to another organization where mera jada varchasva hai, where I don't have to deal with someone like that. So I think till we don't work through envy as a conversation internally and interpersonally, right? And deny it. I think most organizations live in denial of intergenerational envy. And I think it's a very real dynamic. I think the third unconscious dynamic to me feels like we've spoken about significance, we've spoken about envy also, uh, is the point of legacy, right? Saying I want to be the one who's kind of दूर दूर तक संस्था का नाम है तो मेरा नाम आना चाहिए. It should be my legacy. BRM is mine. BRM equals to Abhishek, you know, and there's such a desire to do that, right? And you can see that at so many places. Founders want to be identified with the org and literally become one with the org. They don't want to pass it on, right? And that's at one level, that's human. At one level, that's very egoistic. At one level, there is like, and it costs the org and it costs the cause, right? And a lot of times I've seen founders not allow people to grow around themselves because they want to unconsciously, maybe not consciously. Consciously, they keep complaining, "Arey, we're not getting people. It's hard to find people. It's hard to develop." But the unconscious dynamic might just be that I want to be the one who's known for this org. It hits me each time Kejal is seen as BRM or Abhishek is seen as acha, oh, tu Kejal ke organization mein ho tum, and there are the spaces where you have found yourself, and the desire in the leader is to be known to everybody as that org and have that legacy. And I think for me and us, I think you going into spaces where I have not been there and building your own voice, and then when I go into those spaces, for me to be known as somebody from Kejal's organization is deeply joyful, but it can also be deeply humiliating if you've not done your own work, saying hey, isko founder bhi nahi pata hai, or right. And I think just that generosity, and again allowing multiple people to have the legacy of that org, not just one. I think that letting go, knowing that it'll create something bigger and greater, that's also something that we don't speak enough about.
And I think that part all of us have learned from you because I think BRM very early on started to divest this whole centralization of opportunities and visibility to one person to many people. So there are so many networks and spaces where, people wouldn't even know you and me both, and they would know somebody else was being part of that network and is repping BRM for years there. And they're like, oh, you're part of the same organization. I have only met this person for so many years. So I didn't know you were also part of the same organization. So I think in that sense, BRM lands up becoming very mysterious for all right reasons, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of an anarchy for the right reasons. How people go around, represent, and happily do that. And compared to any other organization where this would be held very tightly and the founder would have the first right to represent, kind of a thing, then BRM, the whole conversation is entirely different in terms of how free it is. That our people are happily going, and that's great. I think that represents how I think, and Sarvanumati is a very important part of that. I think the phase where we were doing Sarvanumati, where any of us can represent all of us. I think this idea that I am a rep not only of the org, I don't have to be mandated. I am the org when I go there, right? And I think to me, the phase of Sarvanumati allowed us to embody that, and that still carries, right? That I'm authorized by the org, I am the org, and I can go. I think that allows multiple voices. It creates a mysterious org thing, chal kya raha hai, but I think internally it's very rich for growth.
So since we are on this whole piece of unconscious dynamics, I think one of my general curiosity, which I think everybody knows now, is around this whole piece on gender. And I find our combination of being able to do this transition across genders is also very interesting and much rarer, in fact. What do you feel on this piece, Abhishek?
Well, I feel a lot on this piece. I think there's a lot there. I think men of certain generations, and I would say I'm generalizing a lot, and I'm going to say a lot of politically incorrect things in this answer, but it's in spirit of the essence of what I'm trying to say. I think the comfort with men and comfort with women for men is different. And when it comes to organization, power, sharing, men do seem to be more comfortable with men in sharing and aligning as the boys' club or creating a glass ceiling. And that comfort in turn means that it's easier to kind of have your own kind of successors be from those the same gender, I think, and building that comfort, intimacy, while the gender dynamics are also at play in today's world. I think that is definitely one kind of one challenge, right? You to negotiate that gender dynamic between relationships, and I'm sure it's vice versa. Too, I mean, as for women and men, the other way. I think the other is that this whole middle-aged man uh, and the privilege that a middle-aged man enjoys in this society, because the whole society really unconsciously internalizes that this middle-aged man and the old-aged man is probably the political guy, but the middle-aged man is kind of running the society because when we were younger, we saw our father being a middle-aged man, being a provider, and so on. So there's a deeply internalized idea that men who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or mid 30s to say mid 50s, uh, I think just the kind of confidence people feel in these in us, if I have to say, right? And then you're like, okay, I've said the same things forever, but something about being an older man works in my favor, and so there is something about that also that creates this whole boys club or men's club, that men want to support men, and now I'm seeing a very strong sisterhood emerge, which is great. The solidarity between women is rising, but that's only now. I think we're
Yeah.
sitting and there's so much past there. So when you know that, okay, there is a men's world out there, then you're unconsciously maybe also picking men to run things. So some of these dynamics are present in places where we don't talk about them. Also, this internalized sense that, oh, as a woman, she does not have the same energy, stamina to run things, and she'll not be able to show up with that consistency, and it'll soften up my organization. Some of that also is at play. So a lot of these are not spoken about because they're so controversial and difficult to speak, but I think they're all at play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also when I look around just for organizations which are like started by women founders and maybe only women founders, it's so rare. Most organizations are either set up by men or like a combination of men and women, and then you see mostly like the men leading it, at least, or being the visible parts of it. So that is definitely one part of irritation, as you know, as founders or even as next line saying that, oh, maybe only men are supposed to lead organizations because only most men are leading the organizations right now.
Absolutely. I think that needs to really, really change, I think. And it's again a lot of work for all of us. As a man, I'm taught to try and be kind of the alpha in the room and get all the attention, be the most confident person. So there's a lot of conditioning there. And I'm sure for women, there's a lot of unlearning and really taking up space. So I think that
Yeah.
definitely you're speaking to something that's present.
Yeah, and I think as women, maybe mostly our natural tendency to nurture kind of steps in. So mostly women are in leadership roles. Also, the first set of approaches to nurture, make sure that everybody is well taken care of. You're like making sure there's room for everyone, there's space for everyone, and the space for uh, while there is of course objective outcomes, but there's also a subjective element of the feminine or of the emotional sides being much more present, which I feel only now maybe more newer organizations are starting to recognize, hence the role of well-being and care for people who you're leading the organizations with, which in earlier organizations was not such a conversation because, it just has to be figured and it's a personal matter. And I feel as the tides are shifting and organizations who maybe 10 to 12-year-olds are also now starting to integrate this lens and starting to develop the recognition of role of the relatively invisible, subjective, emotional aspects of work. And I think those are also organizations who call us as Wisdom Tree to, engage and see where else the unconscious dynamics are showing up in the context of an organization. So I definitely feel women in leadership roles are starting to recognize these things much more and able to bring that wisdom back into the organization in a way that it serves the primary purpose.
Absolutely. My prediction is that we will see more and more balanced organizations, right? As women and the nurturance steps in, as structures of the org, within the org also, if structures become more balanced, not just masculine structures, if the older generation is not able to thopo its ambitions on the next generation, because next generation, like, hey, that's your ambition. We want to take this differently. If donors also were able to negotiate, saying everything's not about size scale, there is also depth. I think we'll see more orgs which are choosing balance and sustainability over just plain scale. And leaders have to be okay saying, hey, your next in line doesn't want to kind of outdo you, wants to build a more sustainable institution, right? And it'll be interesting to see what comes up. So yeah, I think there are so many more the unconscious dynamics that I'm not naming. The projection on leaders, dehumanizing leaders, and as an organization, not really surfacing this whole unconscious kind of pedestalizing of the leader kind of a dynamic, and accepting that there'll be a disproportionate share of attention, power. Leaders are also hungry people with large appetites. They want as much power and influence and resources. So it's a tricky balance, but I think I wanted to talk a little bit on the founder side of things, saying, hey, it's not all like that. Founders also make a lot of sacrifice. Starting things is much harder, and there's a reason why founders are resourced, because they do come with a certain energy that needs resourcing for them to manifest, right? And so it's when we say a lot of equality, we miss the point. I think the equity requires some acknowledgement for founders, otherwise there's no incentive for somebody to start. You're like, okay, why should I bother starting anything, right? Like, it's just easier and wiser to join something. So I think the balance between saying, okay, we do celebrate the founder, but we don't make it the be all and end all of everything, because we also celebrate other forms. I think that's the balance that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think definitely agree with this whole point of being a founder is a difficult task. You said earlier in our podcast that a founder does three things. I think a founder does at least seven things because that's the only way you can start an organization and do all the functions that it requires. Right from being good at the program and the cause you've picked up to doing all kind of compliance, people hiring, finance management. So founder typically does seven things at least by themselves, and they're definitely good at it so that they're able to get the organization off the ground. Otherwise, in today's times, to just start anything, forget about a social organization, even to start a small enterprise, it's so hard because you have to get so many things right and get the product market fit, so to say, going and get the finances and the product going and then get your stakeholders invested in what you're wanting to pitch to them. So it is
Absolutely.
not easy to be a founder for sure, and definitely not of a non-profit. So the whole leverage or the acknowledgement that founders get is also not totally misplaced. I think we end there is the part of the problem, not that we cannot start there.
Thank you, Kejal. I feel seen. And in the spirit of, like, you pat my back, I pat your back, I'm going to flip it back also to say that being in next in line is also not easy, because each time you are identified as saying, oh, Abhishek, your organization, say, yeah, and to own your CEO role also. And I'm curious about our own journey also. I think part of it is definitely luck. I think we're now 12 or 13 years working together, and you moved from volunteer to CEO. So part is luck, but part is also hard work. And maybe there are certain milestones in our own journey of leadership planning, such that now you are building your next in line and they're taking up things. So I'm curious if you had to reflect back on our journey, like what gives us the right to talk about succession planning or N+1 leadership. So curious if you have any memories or any transition points where you felt like, okay, this was an important, significant turning point.
I think couple of I think personal milestones which I will link with the organization milestones for just to start off. I remember I think 2016 December when we were talking about, because CCF as a model was not fully viable. 2016 is not when fellowships were a known cause, nor was active citizenship a known cause. So it was getting very hard to get funding and to keep CCF as a program floating. It was just not adding up. And we said, we need to reorganize something. And at that time, VRM Trust had many other initiatives going. I know I was offered if I wanted to join in any of the other programs, and I said no. And then you came up with this most vague idea ever possible, saying that okay, CCF will continue, but we will start working with the alumni of the program, and we'll start building a movement of young people. We'll go to all these alternatives that are around, and they've figured something totally different, which is outside this system and almost talking about a parallel system. So I found that as a very important turning point in one is of course for me to commit to say, let's start something and try out. Even if it doesn't work, at least we know 3 years we put our time effort into trying to build something very radical and different. And if it doesn't work, we know what doesn't work. And I can still go back to another job and be a fellowship coordinator or a program manager or something of that sort. And I feel at the same time, in that decision, also in our journey, the vision to break out of the box and try something which hasn't been attempted and bring the many ideas and many people who are inspiring us together was a very important um, point. And it was not just a conversation between the two of us. We also brought in all our alumni members and had a whole evening with them. And that's why 25th December is the starting day of the movement because its alumni came together. They made a decision of how to engage, what to do. And then many of these pieces started falling together in our journey. So I felt how it started, where it started, and how each person had to negotiate some part of, what they wanted to do to sacrifice or to say, okay, let's take the risk and that made the transition happen.
Good to know. I think Vinoba's idea that didn't want the society to be a full moon night where there is no other star and there's just one moon glowing, but want the society to be a moonless night where every star is glowing and it's a
Hmm.
galaxy of stars. I think that idea really touches me as much as I would love to be the moon uh, or the sun. But what the society really needs, as I understood from Vinoba, is a leader-full society. And we see leader-less organizations that are actually so hollow and shallow that they're actually wobbly beyond their kind of top line, right? Because they've not done the work of building that. And I think they really need to do that. Otherwise, then finally it comes to a point where they're going to shut down because there's no leadership built. And that's dangerous for the org. But a leader full organization, on the other hand, has layers and layers of leaders because that's all you were cultivating all the time. And I think that leader full organization is what I think we need to build so that there is an abundance of leadership. And that's where you'll have to share your power. You'll have to allow people to question. You'll have to think together with them. You'll have to be generous with incentives and sharing attention and so on. So a whole bunch of things need to be in place, I think. And for us, that carries forward, right? Because like sees like. I can't expect you to build the next in line if I have not worked with you and built you. But because I have done that, you're able to do that. And that's how it kind of carries forward. So yeah, I think that, and the choices that you also made, right, each time to kind of trust the system, to walk with the system, I think all of that also adds up over time. So I think our journey has also had a lot of negotiation all the time. I think going back and forth on things and stuff. So I think it's not such a easy transition, such an immediate transition, And if I'm asked, like, what are a few principles of transitions, I think one is that it takes time. I think the
Hmm.
first thing I would say is it takes longer than expected. And people just assume they'll find the next in line suddenly, either from the org or outside. And I'm like, no, this is a long process. If you want a really solid kind of next in line to take the organization to an N+1 level, you'll really need much, much longer for it to really work out, right? And it can't be an instant thing. I don't know if you agree on this whole takes long kind of a piece, because you're also working for a long time now with your next in line.
It definitely takes really, really long. And I think just between our transition also, it's been long and what we are trying now with the others. I think I had a flip question for you. I think the important part of this whole process is how do you identify who is this person? And it was not that there is only one person around, there are always so many people around. Some people leave, some people continue, you know. So you could always like argue saying that oh, X person and Y person could have been held back. I think as a founder, as somebody who is building the system, you could have been just focused on going ahead and building it, but you also kept your eye on to say, okay, no, let's look already for people. What is that seeing? What is that gives you the kind of trust to say, okay, let's take this risk, let's take this bet? And how do you identify? Because BRM's been working with young people for so long. Who of them? Why?
Yeah, I think firstly, there is not only one kind of successor, right? Everybody is potentially taking parts. So I would say if I'm looking at only one, the successor, my vision anyways starts narrowing. I have to look at everybody kind of coming up together and really saying that I shouldn't stop looking for that one leader, start looking for, a bunch of people who may take this forward. And from there, things will emerge, people will emerge. The early me made the fault of looking for people like me, like people who are extroverts, people who love speaking, attention, and ideating kind of people, right? And I think that was again a limited vision of a leader looking for people similar to themselves, right? And I think from there I have reached a point where for me I connect to the potential of a person, right? So for me, that connection is not to the Kejal of the present, but also to my idea of Kejal of the future, who's a better Kejal in most ways, right? Wiser Kejal, broader, more exposure wali, more powerful, more impactful, more disciplined, all of that. And this imaginary potential Kejal, I feel so much loyalty to that. A lot of times I reprimand you saying I'm reprimanding you on behalf of your future self. And I think if you really want to do kind of good succession planning all the time, you keep nudging people towards what you see their best potential, but not in your direction, not to make them copies of you, but their essence and spirit, to keep nudging them more and more to be more of themselves, right? So not making a copy, but keep nudging them to be more and more of themselves, express their essence more and more, and reach their higher potential. So I think as leaders, we have to talk to the potential of people, who they can be, not who they are. And when it comes to who they can be, you see that there is no limit in a way, right? And each person is a potential. Who knows, a mayor of a city, a prime minister of a country, you don't know who you're dealing with, right? So you trust and honor the potential in each person. I think that gaze and saying that how do I nudge this person to their highest potential? Not just how can they be my organization's next leader. That sometimes is a side effect. If you're nudging people to their highest potential, more such people will come and join. As more people join, that potential increases. Some of them will start taking up leadership. So I would say not looking at one person, but looking at everybody, not looking for copies of yourself, and then nudging everybody towards their potential. I think that's how one really creates a leaderful space.
Lovely, absolutely. Also, good time to give shout out to other people in BRM who also enabled the transition because I think if it was only me, I don't think this transition would have been successful at all. I want to just bring in also Ashok Akash at this point, who've been around in the system for so long, taken up so many different pieces when the transition happened. So the transition is not just between two people, but between so many of us who took up different parts of the role. And generally, transitions are about the whole organization or the whole system moving, right? Any one person just moving would not enable the transition because who else will then start taking what I was doing? So, transitions are also about so many people wanting to reorganize in a way that they start taking up more responsibility. It's not about replacing the founder with another new person.
Absolutely. And different people take up different parts of what the founder does also and add their own parts. I think one gender dynamic there is also very important. Not gender as much as like, oh, ye iske prati biased hai. Kejal's Abhishek's kind of favorite child kind of a thing, and he's a biased person. And when in an org that also starts happening. When you're doing an N+1, everybody wants to be the N+1, and then you have to break this idea that there is one N+1, right? I've had to say, yes, I am a biased person. I've never claimed neutrality, but I have a bias towards each person in their own unique ways, right? And I think when it comes to this whole N+1, you may end up creating competition in an org because everybody wants to be your N+1. And sometimes unconsciously leaders set it up that way, that there is competition for their attention, their love, and so on. So one has to really also balance that power in a deeper way, right? And then there is a gender dynamic of men to men dynamic, right? Saying that, hey, like, do I want to be quote unquote under this person or listen to this person? How do you build power with somebody? and build power with the next generation, not kind of dominate them or be dominated by them. I think so. That's a whole different kind of dynamic at play, and I think I've had to navigate some of that also, and just as they have had to. So, yeah, that's how I think a gang kind of build. I think it needs inner work on all sides. It's not only one person's inner work; it's also the other person's, also collective work on looking at all this, especially if you want a sustainable transition. I think all of us have to do our inner work without the guarantee that it may still work out. But inner work at least increases the probability, right? So most of the orgs try to set up systems but don't do enough inner work because there is no measurable, there's no outcome. And by inner work, I mean self-awareness practices, dialogue practices, collective silence, presence, activities, memories, creating memories together. I think all of that needs to happen. Also, because it's not just capacity, the transition is more about spirit than capacity. If it would be only capacity, you could just hire a next in line from the market and like say, okay, just put money and get. But it's not the capacity, it's the spirit. And spirit can't be taught, it transmits. And spirit transmits intangibly, it transmits through spaces, through behavior, through being. So to me, the conversation is not about capacity and systems, which organizations mostly assume. For me, it's about inner work. For me, it's about culture. For me, it's about the spirit. I think we miss the point when we reduce succession planning just to, okay, these are the capacities, this is the job description. That's not really what works fully. It's necessary but not sufficient.
So this gives a good ground, Abhishek. I think the question I want to next move to is what is the prep? What is the prep and who needs to do it? Is it just a person? Is it the whole system? And what all? Is it like a long laundry list?
It is unfortunately a long laundry list. I think the first prep is the founder's prep saying, I'm ready to let go, and it is to acknowledge that this organization is becoming a cage or it's becoming a chain that I'm tied to. I've become a founder who enjoys the power, enjoys the attention, loves being a part of this org. And who will I be without this org? How can I leave it? So I think the internal
Hmm.
prep of a founder to let go, and not let go into irrelevance, but let go knowing that, hey, there is a wider avenue, a bigger role for me than just my org. And there is more to do than just to keep growing my org infinitely, right? There are more problems to solve. There is more alignment to build. And hopefully we'll talk a bit about ecosystem leadership as we go. But I think the inner prep of being willing to let go, being willing to let someone else succeed in your own org and exceed you. I think that inner prep is kind of prep number one. I think from there you're able to give confidence to the next in line to say, hey, you can do this. Because next in line is always intimidated by the leader and they're like, okay, can we even do this? To make them believe that, hey, you can do and you can do a better job. You have gifts that this org needs, right? So instilling that confidence is kind of also prep. And then for the next in line to also own that confidence, say, yes, I can do it. That again takes time. So that's kind of the second piece. And the third piece is organization being ready to accept that, okay, there is someone else other than this founder who we now have to adjust to,
Hmm.
including peers, right? You had peers who have to adjust, not only people who are reporting into you, to accept that now there is somebody else in charge. So the whole org mentally has to also start preparing for somebody else to lead, and uh, Lion King is not exactly the best example, but I love the fact that when there is a circle of life in Lion King, and the cub is born, and everybody it's shown Simba is shown to everybody, and everybody cheers, and kind of an announcement saying this is what the circle of life is going to give. So I disagree with the hierarchy. I disagree with kids being your successors, but I think the deeper point I'm trying to make is that already, even before Simba has become kind of the Lion King, right at the start, there is a kind of making it visible. So you have to start making it visible, saying these are the next line, pass on decisions to them, let them decide, let them take calls. Ki, bhai, it's your direction, you say what you want to do. So I think that's kind of, so it's a, and then prep with the outsiders, with funders, with the board, with external stakeholders saying, hey, I'm not the one repping now, they are the ones repping the org. Otherwise, everybody wants the founder to rep the org, right? So it needs an entire prep all across to let this happen. It's not again just one prep. But the most important prep to me is the internal prep of the founder. Is the toughest piece.
Yeah, and I think in this whole piece of prepping, I'm also kind of curious to hear a little more on this whole external stakeholder piece and when and how to do it, because it is, at least the organization feels much more in your kind of ambit of influence and control and conversations than the external piece.
External piece is a little bit of a disaster because the whole world wants to talk to the founder. Everybody wants to bet on whoever is initiating. People want to talk to the person who can get things done, decide. And so it's really hard to break that whole mindset. And you know this as well as me, right? That to literally advocate, you have to push, you have to step back and say, I'm not coming only on this call. To force, literally, I think we've had to force people to, at least some people were open and very happy, but some people we had to literally force them into accepting a new leadership. So I think the external world still doesn't create conditions for succession planning. They make it tougher rather than easier, right? Because everybody wants to deal with their own peers, and so I think it's not easy. External is also a very tough piece, and it needs relentless advocacy, combination of stepping back, stepping in. Yeah, so I think it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add is also constant cycle, at least between the two of us. I can say it's not like, one step forward, two steps back, and at times three steps forward and again one step back. So we've had to do a lot of iterative understanding on what is the right timing to transition when, rather than hurrying to transition everything all at once. Which I think maybe if it is a clinical transition, if somebody is just ending, then yes, you have to do it and then you figure out. But at least in our kind of an approach where we are wanting to become an ecosystem and not just an organization which is cutting roles and saying that, come fill this role. I think it has been a very iterative process to transition.
Think this here I want to bring on one important thing that happened for us, which is that because our organization was leaderful and others could represent the org and I wasn't required everywhere, for me that allowed me to explore other spaces. And when I explored other spaces, I realized that social problems can't be solved by one organization. We need an ecosystem. And then I started weaving the ecosystem. So the organization was not sucking away all my time such that I'm just captive to the org. And that the fact that the org had leaders, the org had a culture which allowed this to happen, which let go of its leader, sometimes at the cost of its own size and scale, maybe, who knows. But just that allowed us as a whole to see that there is an ecosystem. We need leadership that is at an ecosystem level, not just at an org level, that is enabled by the culture of leadership. That's enabled when the whole org kind of is holding space for the leaders and others to travel, sense make, and so on. So to me, this whole idea of ecosystem leadership would not perhaps be born in our ecosystem itself if I would just be attending to BRM, right? And because BRM was a leaderful space and it allowed this whole thing to happen, I think we are beneficiaries because we are like, wow, this is what a good culture, a culture which allows a surplus of time and energy that the leader can then invest in something beyond the org. That's what it makes possible, right? So I think to me, ecosystem leadership is a result of a thriving culture that sets the leader free. I think so many leaders are captive in their own orgs. They want to leave, they want to pass it on, but they don't know how, or all these dynamics make it tough for them. They know that there is something beyond for them, that they have to lead the civil society, that problems are interconnected, there is a meta crisis, and yet it's so hard to let go, right? Because of all these dynamics we spoke about. And I think a thriving culture in an org which lets the leader rise beyond is essential. If it's a culture that secretly is dependent, codependent on the leader for everything, they'll never let the leader kind of move on to kind of the next roles, to start new things or to spread around, right? At the same time,
Yeah.
you don't want to abandon your leader because they're carrying some wisdom. So you want them to be present. You don't want them to run away also. You want them either on your board or as an advisor because they also know the DNA of the org and the pulse of the org. So it's a balance there.
Yeah, I think, and I can affirm a few points on this piece, right? Like the organization also being in service of the highest potential of the leader. And I think from many times in our equation, I'm like, maybe not, like the org still needs you. And there's so many reasons to say, no, Abhishek, stay on because this is not figured. Funding is not figured. This is not figured. So I feel there are at times not really the right time where everything is figured and sorted and then you kind of make the transition. As much as it's a in sync saying that, this is in the highest potential of the leader and the cause that we're really wanting to serve. And as an organization, let's take this risk and see how we can figure this. And while not all pieces of the puzzle will be solved neatly and tightly at this point, but we will figure in the journey, in the flow, that how to get this going without needing to, wait to kind of pull you back and say, okay, we can't do this. So it's a bit of a hit and a miss also. I'm not sure uh, how to say if it has already always worked, but it has worked in most times and in most cases.
I think this is a very important link that we need to see, right? When the front line of an organization doesn't take ownership and pulls the middle line into doing its work, the middle line is not able to do its work and pulls the kind of senior leadership, and then the senior leadership pulls the leader to do their work and do their thinking. And so everybody is doing an N-1 org. The whole org has moved one level lesser. And the reverse is also true. If the front line's thinking like the middle line's thinking like the senior team's thinking like the leader, then the leader can think about ecosystem. And that's kind of what we call the N+1 org. So while it may seem like a small thing, that you let the leader go, but it's a lot of responsibility, firstly, because you're going to mess up, you're going to make mistakes, and it's risky. But when you take that, right, and like you said, the leader's highest potential, I remember so many times me telling you also that, hey, I'm responsible for your potential, but you're responsible for mine. And you have to make sure I reach my highest potential also. So this small act of letting the leader go and the whole org allowing that, to me, impacts the civil society. I think today civil society's biggest leaders might be busy or are busy running their own organizations, and it's harder for them to come together as a single kind of front because the orgs are pulling them in, their causes are pulling them in. I think it's changing. We can see it change in front of our own eyes, but that's only when orgs are allowing leaders in some ways to not kind of be their parents and always be there, but letting them take on these roles. And I think, to me, the civil society itself being able to come together and put forth its own voice depends on this whole thing of orgs allowing leaders to actually come together. Right now, that isn't happening, and I think it's costing the Samaj, if I have to say. And it's a tall claim, but I feel there is a link there between what the front line chooses to do and where is the civil society coming together.
Yeah, and I think just given how things are, I don't think there is a time when all ops is effective, all funding is sorted. I think times are such turbulent times where it's still always a work in progress, and yet you have to make bigger kind of leaps and moves to see that, if we want to think ecosystem and if we want to think about our cause, how can we keep moving in that direction, even if it means one step at a time.
Yeah, I would argue that N+1 leadership is the single biggest requirement for ecosystem leadership. We think, oh, we want to build weavers or leaders who have certain networking skills or who have an internal centeredness and who have resources and who have perspectives. So we have so much theory around, and we as Wisdom Tree also have such a point of view on what it takes to be ecosystem leaders. What we can't stress enough is the org has to be ready. The single biggest requirement for ecosystem leadership is the N+1 org. It's the next in line stepping up so that the leader can take up the ecosystem leadership role. And if that doesn't happen, the leader stays captive to the org stays dependent on the leader. That's not healthy for the sector, not good for the world.
Yeah, and I think here is a good time to appreciate and like give a shout out to the rest of the team at BRN, because so many times we've been just not available. And I think there's only one answer: I am not available, and just go and figure the rest, including at times providing mentors or external support system. But at times in that, hey, you need to decide. I don't know how to decide. I don't have all set of information time required, which I think at the initial beginning I have to acknowledge it was a little harder and tougher to see that, how am I supposed to decide this and make this decisions. But now retrospectively, what it has given us is really reverse, right? It's given us at times time to say, okay, guys, these decisions have to come to me. You can't take these decisions by yourself because this is not adding up, which is a very different type of a problem to solve.
I think we've had to take this conversation of the middies, which was the middle line of BRM, to say we'll retire this word only middies, because as long as this word middies is there, y'all will act like middies. And we said y'all are now the oldies, y'all are the senior leadership team. So we came up with this word called moldies. You are the middle who are oldies. And then they came up with a new word saying that, we are old news, we are the new age oldies. And this whole, it's banter and fun at one level, but it's a deep transition at another level, where you are creating conditions for senior leadership to emerge and you're nudging them, you're shaking them out of their comfort zone so that they may step up. And this is what I mean by the N+1 org. Everybody is pulling everybody else to their next level, to their highest potential, and not waiting that, oh, there is a succession planning time, let there be a few years, let them settle into their role. I think that's a luxury. The spirit which today things are moving, the moment you come into the role, you not only have to be good at your role, but you have to start training for the next role. Because I think to me, the whole N+1 org is constantly moving towards the next, right? That's what we mean. So by the N-1 org, we mean the org where everybody is getting pulled to the next level. The middle line is getting pulled into ops, and the strategic team is getting pulled into the tactical level. That's N-1 org. The N org is perhaps where everybody is stable and doing their own thing and doing succession planning, maybe. The N+1 org is where everybody is saying, okay, I'm being good for my role, but I'm also preparing for the next role, right? And that's what lets the org constantly shape shift, be agile, and respond. So I think that's what we mean by the N+1 org, right? And here I want to kind of say Wisdom Tree helps create this N+1 org. It needs a lot for it to happen. We're happy to help orgs, support orgs to tap into their energy and become an N+1 org.
Here, I want to add one more reason, right? Like, why do you need an external person or an external organization to come and be part of this journey? Because so many times while you're inside the bubble, you can't see what's going on. And at such points, knowing people who understand OD, who understand the invisible dynamics and so many stresses and tensions kind of playing out in the organization is so important. And is it that all of us, like, we have done this inside our org ourselves? No, we've also from time to time brought external people like, facilitators who held our values process, to facilitators who said, why are you calling yourself a leaderless organization? You're a leaderful organization because you have leaders at all levels of the organization, the people who have helped us really work through power and power as a lab and say, this is how power is playing out in your collective. So from time to time, we've also leaned into external support to enable this for ourselves. And hence, also, we are full believers of why, when organizations are planning this transition, they need to bring in external support who is close enough to understand the context, but external enough to not get dragged into the same drama or, dynamics of the org and input it with the right intent.
Absolutely. Not exact example, but sometimes you need a good mama or chacha to come into the family and remind the dad that they're or mom that they're not doing their part, right? You need this alternate referee and alternate neutral power center that can disrupt these patterns that the leaders and the kind of next in line may be set into. So definitely that. And we practice what we preach. We also have our own kind of, we invite other kind of orgs to support us as well. So yes, we are in integrity like that.
So we've been talking about organizations and ecosystems both, and we've been kind of dancing between the two. But if you had to say, what's one requirement for an organization to really move from org to ecosystem, what would be that?
Well, organizations have to stop being self-obsessed, I guess, and show up, right, to say that, hey, there's something beyond us, and it's not only about our size, our scale, and only about us, but about the larger cause, which requires us to collaborate, which in turn requires our leaders to actually coordinate with each other, which requires leaders to be free, which requires the N+1 and the culture to support the leaders, right? So if you trace it all the way back, you need multiple orgs in a sector to have cultures where their leaders are free to align, coordinate, and truly create an ecosystem. So, long periods of nurturing leaders and organizations in any sector will allow leaders to come together and look at the cause from a multidimensional lens and really impact the cause. Right now, it's the reverse. Orgs are kind of occupied with themselves. They're struggling for their own survival. Leaders are getting pulled to the next level. They don't have the surplus required to come together, so they do not coordinate. So, a lot of problems don't really get solved at the level they should really be solved, right? And we're again and again saying, let's do this. Let's bring ourselves together. Let's coordinate with ourselves and other actors. And for that, we need some surplus. Leaders need surplus energy, surplus time, and the only place to generate that surplus is from the org and its culture, right? So I think tracing all the way back, if you ask me what's the single biggest requirement, I'd say it's a culture. It's an N+1 culture that allows the org to not get just survival or self-occupied, but think ecosystem, coordinate with others, collaborate, and really take a good look at the problem and solve it at the next level.
I think one more thing I would add with this, Abhishek, I think the context of where our civil society organizations are right now, we've tried this enough number of times. It's not that organizations have not tried this. Organizations have tried this in different forms. either to collectivize and become, collaboratives, collectives, networks. And I think there is a little bit of the bad past experience. And at the same time, we're always trying to move forward. So as the past starts accumulating, it's harder to move forward. And hence it also shrinks us to say, I have to just preserve my own thing and do it my way. What do you want to kind of add for that as a feeling or that as a constraint?
I look at it entirely the other way. I think as past starts to accumulate, learning starts to accumulate. We understand better what not to do. And I think centralized leadership is one of the things we're all kind of hurt by, saying, hey, like it starts very collectively, but it becomes centralized. So we're learning how to be decentralized and yet be effective in outcomes. How does one balance that? We've seen energizing collectives becomes harder, especially if you make only funding based collectives, then as soon as funding runs out, the collective disintegrates, right? And so you have to build a relational collective that also has multiple forms of capital. So I feel we are learning. I feel the idea of collectives is just about starting. The idea of ecosystems is just about starting. And collectives may be orgs which are on a similar cause, and ecosystems may involve other actors which influence the cause, right? So to me, ecosystems is yet another stage further, right? And I think we are learning and we're evolving, and all of us are learning. Corporates are, of course, much better at this in the sense that they have succession planning, they have HR, but the context of corporates is also relatively of a different nature, of a different dimension, right? Where there are certain outcomes and you know what kind of leaders will do this, what strategy is required, what's the external environment. I think it's interesting that Sarkar and Samaj have different things. I think the politics, the only succession planning that works, it seems, is in the family when somebody, and I don't have such a big issue with family based politics succession because the truth is you're born in a political family. Since childhood, you've learned politics. So, of course, it's not meritocracy, but it says something about succession planning. Why does dynasty politics work so much? Because it has been given time to groom and you've learned and you've taken on. So I don't advocate it at all, but I'm saying there is a principle hidden there for us to learn from, right? And yeah, civil society doesn't have that birth based kind of succession, though second generation social workers tend to be way more effective and successful than first generation. And this is anecdotal, but I'm sure when tested you will see how being kind of that legacy allows things to move forward. We have lots to learn from both corporate and the government, but we have to find our own ways. I think that's my core thought. And on that note, I want to talk about N+1 being a national problem. I think if you really look at the lack of leaders in our society and the absence of people to take things forward, right? Especially in the political space, you have these iconic leaders, and then when you're asked to name the next few leaders in that particular party or next likely successors, you just start running short of names. Our country should have so many leaders, and they do have, our country does have leaders, but we've not had the dynamics of N+1. It's always been, especially in the political space, I feel like the attempt is not to build leadership, but to suppress leadership, right? And I feel as a country itself, to become a country full of leaders, to really allow your next generation to reach its potential, we need N+1 at a whole country level. Look at your next generation as better versions of yourself, having higher potential and resourcing them because the problems are also going to get more complex. So to be believers in the next generation as well. So I think it's not only N+1 org, we have to become an N+1 nation that builds its next line and builds the conditions for them to lead and take things forward rather than consolidating power, rather than directing. It's high time that we flip that, and really build an N+1 nation even.
Tathastu. I hope that comes true, and I think that is definitely something that will nourish all parts of our country and also why just country, the planet also.
Yes,
As we
yes.
move towards the final part, Abhishek, any other thoughts or any other evocations you have to say, why N+1 is the way?
I was going to flip that, Kejal, to you, saying that as we close, is there any tips and tricks and hacks that you want to share? And then maybe I'll also share some evocations. But any tips, tricks, hacks, what would you say to, especially the N+1s? I mean, I'm sure leaders are listening to this, but so are the N+1s who are planning to take up leadership positions. What would you say to them?
Yeah, this is a very common conversation I have with some peers, and I think because this has worked for me, I guess I'm a believer and an advocate, so I can say that there may be some biases, but I think net 90%, if attempted, it is going to be in a higher service of each person who is part of the process. It definitely involves being N plus one, definitely involves renegotiating a lot of dynamics, renegotiating a lot with your idea of what you want, the existing leader's idea of what they want, where the organization is. So it does need a lot of relational work. At the same time, if it is done with the heart, done with spirit, I think it leaves each person feel more energized, each person learn much more through the process because coexisting is the longest and the oldest problem humanity has not figured. And we're all the trying to figure it in all places of our life. May it be between two people in a relationship, may it be between your family, may it be in the context of an organization, or in Samaj and Samaj Sarkar Bazaar trying to renegotiate. I think if we learn to coexist better in our between people of people who we relate with, people who we 60% align with also, I think we will learn a lot more about the context. And that's how I feel institutions are built. That's how I feel something that travels longer enough than any one person or any two people builds because it has much deeper roots. And when you want to dig deeper, at times you have to till the soil, remove the weeds, and do all of that part of the process. It is painful, and I know as a millennial, you're like, no, I don't want to have this difficult conversation. Why should I go and tell this person? This person should have understood, etc. At the same time, building comfort with the discomfort and having these conversations, I feel is a important part of building a bigger institution that just doesn't serve one program but serves the cause and serves something that is really needed of us at these times.
Great, that sounded really beautiful and important, I think substantial. To your question about evocations, I would definitely start with Vivekanand. Swami Vivekanand has said that your ancestors were great, but you must be greater. And he said, if you need permission from anybody, I give you the permission to be greater than your ancestors. And I love that evocation, saying that, yes, you don't have to be subservient, saying, oh, ancestors, you have to exceed them for the cause of this nation, for the cause of the world. And I think that for me seems like such a powerful way to think about it, right? And the permission from Swamiji himself, I'm like, okay, we have the permission. So I think that's one evocation to the N plus one, saying, okay, your founders were great, you must be greater, not because you want to exceed the founders, but because the world needs to move forward. I think so. That's one. And the other evocation is Vinoba. I think, and I did a twist on Vinoba. So Vinoba said that we need a kind of the society has to be like a moonless night where every star shines. And I added a twist saying that when you go to the galaxy of that star is the sun. You be the sun of your own galaxy, but in the society as a whole, be stars. And once in a while, I want you to visit my solar system where I am the sun, right? And say, yeah, sure, I can be the sun in my solar system, but my commitment is not to overshadow, but to create this moonless night where all these stars kind of come in, right? And we are responsible to build that collective consciousness, not just let a few people hold up. I think there are lots of examples, and I would include Gandhiji also, Vinoba also, himself realizing that if a few people rise, the whole society kind of is not able to rise. And this is hard work, but this is the work. I'm convinced that this N plus oneing is the work of tilling the soil and creating the collective consciousness that will guide us through this phase. I think so. Yeah, to me, it's very central to the question of our times. So yeah, this was a great conversation, Kejal. Thank you so much. I enjoyed jamming with you, and I hope this reaches some of the people it's meant to reach. And with that trust, thanks a lot.
Yeah, it was beautiful to go back through the memory lanes, bring back some things from there. Also hold on to the core question and the core inquiry, which is a very forward inquiry to move and build something which goes beyond any one organization to more ecosystems.